fit.
Yep. And that actually goes into the next sort of thing I want to just pick your brain about, and I'm going to start with another story again, if you guys don't mind. But it's a term actually that you introduced to me to is the I don't know what the FANAFI, find a need and fill it. Now, I want to tie that back to a book that if every entrepreneur listening to this section hasn't read, it's called The Blue Ocean Strategy. And I want to give an example, and I want to try to show you how Nicholas and I have sort of taken the concept of working and selling in a blue ocean and how we've applied design thinking to sort of enhance that. So I'm going to share my screen one more time.
And while you're doing that, I'm just going to double click for anybody that's listening to this. Definitely go read that book. Like, if we're posting the video, you're going to see me doing the raise the roof motion. That book is phenomenal. And like, I'm getting my notebook out to take notes on this section specifically. So I'm super excited.
And by the way, these charts will obviously be available in the video, but I'm happy to share them with others. So this actually sort of ties into what we just talked about, right? This idea of my capability as an entrepreneur or a startup. What do I do? What do I sell basically, or what does my product or service do? And then on the other line is this idea of the prospect's needs. And right in the last section, we talked about how we have high needs and high capability. We have a good market fit. But what really happens in the world today is our prospect needs are represented by these red dots, and our capability is on the other axis, right? And what happens is that's where so many people go in and sort of try to do this feature function selling, right? Here's your need, here's my capability. Here's my need, here's your capability, right? So it's this idea of back and forth, back and forth. What I like to say is that's, if you're those of you that are my age and watched Lost in Space, it's like when the robot would go, danger, Will Robinson, danger, danger. You are now swimming in the red ocean. In other words, you are just in a feature function battle with 100 other companies and 100 other product or services, and you're just going to beat your head down on cost. And so what most salespeople do is they go, well, I'm going to upsell. I'm going to tell you about the value add. So they start talking about more capability that the client in theory hasn't said they need. Well, unfortunately, the prospect or the buyer perceives that as increased cost and complexity, which of course slows your deal down. That was the exact problem we had after we bought the company. We started talking about all the red dots and all the green dots, and all of a sudden the client's going, holy crap, this is going to be really expensive and it's going to take me forever to deploy and implement. So I would argue, so the question is, how do I get out of this red ocean and into the blue ocean? And so the concept is sort of basic, but sort of, and Nicholas, you actually alluded to it when we started up, which was sort of cool because we hadn't rehearsed this. It's how do you uncover the clients or the prospects' unconsidered needs, right? So it's how do you identify problems and needs the prospect does not even know they have, which is a classic example of being a disruptor, right? It's Unmet, Uber is probably the greatest one. Whoever thought that you would want to, order a car service from a total stranger on an app, right? And you disrupt the taxi cab industry, right? So the taxi cabs were all fighting in this red ocean, and Uber came up and figured out there were a whole bunch of things that me as a rider didn't even know I needed. But once I realized it and they showed it to me, it opened up the blue ocean. So that in a nutshell is sort of the, go ahead, Nicholas.
No, yeah, finish what you're saying, and then I wanted to double click on that when you finish.
I'm done.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I love this. I think one of my favorite, product design case studies to kind of illustrate this is some of the work that OXO, they're a kitchen product company. They make good grips. I'm sure people are familiar with them. And what made that story so interesting is that they knew they had a target audience, right? They had a target segments that they're going after from a marketing standpoint. But from a product design standpoint, what they said was, we're going to design for the end user that has the greatest impairment in using their hands. We're going to focus on senior citizens. We're going to focus on people with arthritis. and we're going to design our product to meet their needs. And so by picking that extreme user that's often not considered, right, and designing their product for them, they're able to satisfy the needs of their entire segment. So by starting kind of in the extreme on that edge, a group of people that's often ignored, our senior citizens and our senior community are often ignored when hipsters are making technology. There's this whole world of unmet need that, OXO tapped into and has been incredibly successful as a result. I mean, right now we have the iPhone, right? One question I ask myself is, I've observed my grandmother using your iPhone, and all she does to navigate is press the back button. She picks something, she goes down a tunnel, and then if it's the wrong tunnel, she just back, starts at the top, and then goes down again. And this is how her interaction behavior. But nobody's designing an interface that's going to support that behavior, right? Those interfaces aren't out there. No one's designing phones. No one's dividing devices for these people. No one's designing devices for children, right? We're just trying to find, right now, if you look at the design of our technology, it's like those crazy, or it's like those remote controls that your cable company gives you with 200 buttons. It's like there's all the features, and Apple came out and made 2 buttons and 3 buttons, and it's really easy to use. But you don't
It's actually
get
one of my favorite examples is the cable company remote. And if you've bought a Roku TV and you look at the Roku remote, they designed it to fit the hand, the grip, that you could. I mean, they did a lot of design, and there's 6 buttons on it.
Yeah, but you don't get there until you start thinking about the users with unmet needs or the users that weren't considered. Those extremes, the fringe. I think one of my favorite books, it's by Chip and Dan Heath, called Decisive. They say there's 4 horsemen of bad decision making, and one of them is narrow framing. That's one of the big ones, which is I'm only looking at this tunnel. I haven't expanded the aperture and thought beyond kind of that red ocean into the fringes of the blue ocean and find that opportunity there.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm going to just double click on as far as process goes, I think we're going to this episode's coined phrase is going to be double click because we've all used it at this point. So we do a lot of research into Disney. When we first started Apex, and he has this interesting thing, 4 levels of detail, right? And he would also force the Imagineers when they were coming up with ideas. It's you have to be able to distill this down to 1 sentence. If I don't care if it's a new door hinge or if it's a new ride for the park, 1 sentence as to why, we need to do this, right? What is the value prop in that 1 sentence? And I find it interesting because some of the people that I talk to, at least in the area that I'm in now, I'm finally expanding outside of the Midwest and meeting a bunch of different people. But when we first started, especially in COVID, what we were encountering when we were talking to all of these people is a very anxious mindset when we started to take them into that first diverge, right? It's they get all of this influx of ideas and then they're like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with all of this. But what I found fascinating is actually the more time you're able to be disciplined in that space where there's a lot of different ideas, the simpler the outcome becomes, and John just made a great point with Roku. It's the more time you spend in the quote unquote anxiety of the unknown, you end up with 6 buttons instead of 200. It's really, really easy to say, let's put all of the features on the remote. It is exponentially more difficult to figure out which 6 buttons, I'm going to cuss here, but which 6 buttons people actually give a shit about. Right?
Yep. It's easy to put out the kitchen sink into the product. It's hard to prioritize. People don't like to prioritize. They're risk averse. They don't want to be the one that made the decision. So there's a lot of reasons why people have difficulty picking those 6 buttons.
Dude, it's so important. So important.
Cool.
And a lot of design is about reducing that complexity, right? It's a lot of design is removing stuff. We'll see these interfaces that are designed by engineers and we're lose that. Why do we need this? What's the user trying to do with this page? Okay, that's the priority. Let's remove all the fluff from this page and only focus on the key interaction that the user cares about in this context. And remove the noise, right?
Yeah. Okay, one last thing, and we'll let everybody get on to the rest of their day. I want to give you the last word, Nicholas, on something that you brought up with me, and I'm not sure I even understand it, so I'm sort of looking forward to it. And you had mentioned something about democratizing the creative process, and so it really caught my eye. I mean, we've had a few discussions on it, but I'd love you to just sort of expound on that for us.
Yeah, it actually dovetails really nicely what we were just talking about, right? Like people making decisions, right? How do those decisions get made? And for design thinking, right? For the longest time, going back to that kind of great person or great man theory of history, there's this visionary, this auteur, that has this mega opus vision, magnum opus vision, and we're all just kind of actors in his show, and we're trying to help. When we democratize the creative process, it's very disruptive because it allows a lot more diversity into that creative process. So instead of just one person kind of having a vision for a software, um, it's the difference between making a product and $100 million art project, right? And an art project is a single visionary kind of directing, the Banksy model, where Banksy's the name, but there's 200 artists making his work, right? Versus an effort where you democratize the creative process. You're bringing in your end users. You're bringing in different subject matter experts. You're bringing in a lot of different points of view to really vet that idea before you invest in developing it. So what design thinking really allows people to do is to collaborate in a structured way, bring a diverse point of view to those collaborative activities, and look at the problem through the same lens with that kind of difference that they bring. We might be different, but we're not separate. We might have different points of view, but we're not separate. And design thinking democratizes that creative process to allow those different points of view to work collectively and together in order to achieve an outcome, as opposed to a single individual identifying the hill and then executing against it, right? And when you have that diversity of voice in the room, you get better outcomes, you get better solutions, you get things that are more representative of the community that you wish to serve.
Well said. Cool. All right.